Good morning to the viewers and subscribers. I've been absent for more than a month now from my YouTube channel, and there's many things that caused my absence. I've been very busy in this time, busy with good things. Today I'm back, and hopefully I'll be back for a long period of time, and I'll be able to come up with many videos that I spoke of in the past, many things that have been bugging me that I believe should be out there in the public domain. Before I continue with this video, I just want to say what the focus of this video will be. And that main focus will be on Koeberg Nuclear Power Station and its basic design with regards to accidents, and looking specifically at the large-scale accidents that have happened within the world, at 3 Mile Island, at Chernobyl, as well as Fukushima, to focus on the differences between the Koeberg design as well as those plants. And considering the HBO series on Chernobyl that have come out recently, it is important to explain to people that have a fear around Koeberg what the differences are and why those same events would not happen in the same way just because of the inherent design at Koeberg. And I will also explain what is possible at Koeberg. In other words, what can happen, what can go wrong, what accidents it was designed for, and the basic systems that have been put in place to actually ensure that the public is not affected. If you look at 3 Mile Island, some of you might not be familiar with this. This happened quite a long time ago, before Chernobyl, and it made worldwide news, but maybe not in South Africa as much as in the rest of the world. At 3 Mile Island, they had a core meltdown at one of the units. I don't want to go into much detail. But what happened is the reactor fuel melted and remained within the reactor as designed. In other words, this is a serious accident within the nuclear industry, but it has no effect on the public at large. And this is exactly what one would hope would happen at Koeberg in case of an accident, that the fuel would actually remain inside the reactor. 3 Mile Island was a pressurized water reactor. The big difference between Koeberg and 3 Mile Island is that the Koeberg steam generators are vertical, where the steam generators at 3 Mile Island, they were horizontal. And one of the wonderful designs that is part of the Koeberg design, because of these vertical steam generators, you can have natural circulation when you lose all circulation within the primary circuit or the reactor circuit, which means that if you lose all off-site power, which has happened at Koeberg before, and the primary pumps run down, you get natural circulation developing. So if you keep on supplying water to the steam generators, which is like the kettle at Koeberg, there's 3 of them, then that natural circulation will keep on cooling the reactor coolant system as well as the core, and therefore prevent the temperatures to rise to a point where the fuel would actually melt. If we go to Chernobyl and we look at Chernobyl, which was the next major accident, the design is totally different. Firstly, Chernobyl was not a pressurized water reactor. There was no containment building around the reactor. It was actually a reckless design. And I actually knew someone at Koeberg that worked at Chernobyl before, and he was actually working at a power station close to Chernobyl when the accident occurred. They actually had to shut down their reactors because they thought that they had a radiation leak, when it was in fact the particles from Chernobyl that was airborne that actually had entered their coolant systems. So the Chernobyl accident was absolutely horrific, and what happened there should have never happened if things were controlled properly. Yet it was a design and many flaws in the political system in the Soviet Union at the time that caused such an unstable and unsafe reactor to be run. Now, you must understand that there were more reactors like that, the RBMKs, that were run in Russia for a period of time, even the units at Chernobyl, after the accident. So people were still working there at Chernobyl after Unit 4 actually had a steam explosion. And it's important to understand that this was a steam explosion. It wasn't a nuclear explosion like a nuclear bomb. Well, it might have come fairly close in that instance because the reactor power surged tremendously. But just to explain to you, before we get to Fukushima, what you need for a nuclear explosion, the way you get an explosion with an atom bomb. What you need is uranium or plutonium enriched past 80% enrichment. Now what this means is that 100% would be pure plutonium or pure uranium. Now to get to 80 or 100%, it is infinitely long that you have to actually concentrate up that uranium that you take out of the ground. I mean, you don't get uranium at 20% or 30% when you take it out of the ground. It is minuscule, and you have to concentrate all of that up through very complex processes. In South Africa we use the centrifuge process to actually enrich that uranium or plutonium to a point where it would be called weapons grade. Now at Koeberg the fuel is under 4% enriched, which means you're nowhere near the 80% enrichment that could make it go boom, as the people would very loosely say on Facebook and in the media and many other places since this HBO miniseries has actually aired. So Koeberg cannot explode like a nuclear bomb. It's very important for people to understand that basic concept. But what can happen is that the reactor core can melt down. And if that core melts down, it's important that it is contained, if it should happen. And this takes me to Fukushima. If you look at the Fukushima design, they did have containments around the reactors, but it was steel containments. In other words, it's like the Koeberg reactor pressure vessel, which is a steel vessel, a mild steel vessel, that you put another steel container around. It's nothing like the massive containment building, 1 meter thick concrete with a steel liner inside that Koeberg has. And in the Fukushima event, they lost all offsite power because of the tsunami, and subsequently couldn't cool the reactor core. And the reactor basically melted, the reactor core melted within the reactor and then seeped out of that reactor into the containment building. Some of the containment building got damaged, and then radiation leaked from there, which is an absolute disaster. Should have never happened. A very old design, as well as not as safe as the Koeberg design. It is important to note at this stage that all of the pressurized water reactors of the Westinghouse design, like Koeberg, that's run by the French fleet and in many other countries, have had no core meltdowns. In other words, at none of them have we had an accident like we've seen at 3 Mile Island, like we've seen at Chernobyl, or like we've seen at Fukushima. And there's many reasons for this. When these plants were designed, they thought of all of these possibilities beforehand. And yes, there may be certain things that they didn't consider fully, and those things that they thought of subsequently, modifications were done to all of these plants to upgrade them to the point where they would be safe under those conditions. So it's important to understand that, for instance, in the instance of Koeberg, the government at the time that decided to build Koeberg wanted to put extra stringent measures in place. Their PRA, the probabilistic risk analysis for accidents, they wanted it 10 times more stringent. They wanted 2 safety systems, 100% safety systems, for each of the safeguard systems on the plant. The same with the electrical supplies. And as we know, that even that can fail under the worst conditions. So the inherent plant design needs to be safe. And for instance, at Koeberg, the control rods that quench the nuclear reaction when the reactor trips falls in by gravity. In other words, if you have a loss of power, those control rods will just drop into the reactor core and shut down the nuclear reaction, which means you only have residual heat remaining, which is a concern because you do need to remove that heat or else the core will melt. But there's no nuclear chain reaction happening at that point in time. At Chernobyl, the control rods were pushed in from the side. It was not under gravity that the control rods went in, and it was a very bad design because the tips of those control rods were graphite tips, which initially didn't help to quench the reaction and actually caused a further excursion within that reactor. With the Fukushima design, you sat with a steel container around the reactor, a small steel container. In fact, at the time when Fukushima happened, I was working at Koeberg on a project, and actually seeing the news and talking to the staff, seeing what was happening, and when they had the hydrogen explosions that just ripped the buildings apart, it was absolutely incredible to think that this is happening in today's day and time. And that brings me back to the mentality in the nuclear industry, the safety record of the nuclear industry, and the things that can help us in South Africa to make sure that the oversight with regards to nuclear is done in such a safe way that something like that would be impossible at Koeberg, besides the inherent safe design. And for that, it is very important that the National Nuclear Regulator gives proper oversight at Koeberg. And besides that, what you need further is for Koeberg to keep on being part of WANO and IMPO peer reviews and being able to be measured against the best nuclear power stations in the world. The other thing that one needs for safe nuclear operations is humility. In other words, if you realize that there's something not right that you didn't think of before, you need to say, stop, let's fix things and then carry on. And it's very important in the nuclear industry that that happens. And there are committees at Koeberg that sit down and decide on safety measures like that all the time. And as long as the people in those committees make safe decisions and have nuclear safety at heart, and politics does not interfere to the point where those people make irrational decisions, Koeberg will remain as safe as can be and continue operating for the extended 20 years that the government, the NNR and Eskom is trying to establish right now. And in fact, most of the plans for that extended 20 years is ongoing at the moment. The steam generator replacement and many other things. That will make sure that Koeberg can operate for another 20 years and supply the cheapest energy on the South African grid to the public, you, who will actually end up paying less for electricity because of Koeberg's contribution.